Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Radical Compliance podcast. I'm Matt Kelly, editor of Radical Compliance, and today we are going to talk about the ISO 37001 standard for managing anti-bribery systems. The 37001 standard was adopted by ISO last year, and broadly speaking, it requires all the basic components of an anti-bribery system that most companies already worried about FCPA compliance that they already strive to have. The reporting hotline, the internal controls, the tone at the top, oversight of third parties, it's all in there. The ISO standard sought to codify all of those ideas into a more formal system along the lines of other standards that ISO, which by the way stands for the International Standards Organization, that the ISO already has standards for other functions like enterprise risk management, and this one would fit in that realm. So as I mentioned, ISO 37001 was adopted last year. And since then, we've seen several large companies announce that they either are going to adopt 37001 or are in the midst of doing that. They're very much on their radar screen. In this podcast, we're going to talk with one company, CPA Global, that just announced this month it has already implemented the ISO 37001 standard. So CPA Global is based in London, and it helps other companies manage their intellectual property portfolios. So we are joined today by Mark Speck. He is CPA Global's Chief Compliance Officer and Head of Internal Audit. Mark, welcome to the program. Thanks for being here.
Well, Matt, yeah, thanks for having me.
So first question, how did this come about? Because I know CPA Global already had anti-bribery systems and a program in place. This is nothing you guys have not thought about before. What prompted the interest in ISO 37001 particularly?
Yeah, I mean, there were a few things. Well, first off, we've spent a lot of time with dealing with customers, current customers, and prospective customers on bribery and corruption. And there's the trend has been to answer questions regarding it and to sign up to business code of conduct relational to it. And so we felt by having the certification, we might be able to speed up the sales cycle and also gain more confidence with our current customers and prospective customers. And so we were looking at it too as a bit of a differentiator, if you will.
Okay.
We had also been looking at potentially certifying our agent channel, which is our greatest risk because we have agents and they're law firm agents in almost every country imaginable. So there's 196 jurisdictions, and all of which include the high risk ones. And we were looking for a means of being able to certify them along the lines of bribery and corruption. And so when this came about, we felt we had to take a leadership role and test our program against the requirements.
So I meant to ask, especially for people who may not be familiar with CPA Global, what your principal bribery risks are. Are they those sales agents that you just mentioned?
Well, CPA Global, as you said, one of our core offerings, we're a technology company in the IP space, but we handle renewals. So we've got agents walking in the patent and trademark offices, which are government installations. And so our biggest risk are these agents, especially in relation to UK bribery regs, including facilitation payments potentially being the greatest risk based on the activity they're performing and the other controls we have in place. And the other area of concern is we've taken a rather aggressive approach into Asia Pac over the last few years. We have a strong China, South Korea, Japanese presence, and so obviously we're dealing with vendors over there, and there's always a concern you're dealing with intermediaries that may be crossing the lines.
Okay.
So that's our risk profile mainly are those folks.
Okay, so there you are, day one of your effort to implement the new standard. So what happened? How do you go about it?
Well, before looking at even the 200 published standards, once they became available, I did a high level review against what the guidelines looked like, and it looked like we were at least 80% there.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually, I guess it was October of last year, contacted right around the time ISO was being completed, contacted Christy Grant Hart of Spark Consulting. Now, I'd heard her speak at a couple conferences, and I knew that she was working in a practice that helped companies get ready and performed assessments
Mm-hmm.
and supported companies getting through the audit. So I contacted her, and the first thing they did, of course, was to do a gap assessment. And so I was pleased to learn that we really weren't that far off in terms of types of activities we needed to undertake to meet all the standards and meet all the standards.
Mm-hmm. What
So
did prove most? I'm sorry to interrupt. What did prove most difficult about implementing or getting your hands around this?
Well, a lot of what we were doing wasn't really that difficult in terms of getting ready. A lot of what we were seeing was cosmetic. In other words, we didn't have documentation, for instance, linking risk to controls. In other words, we would have a risk register and we would have controls, but yet we didn't have narratives, stating why we were doing what we were doing, segmentation of how we were managing segmentation. And the other thing, the thing I'd say was the most difficult was really the coordination of the whole audit with having what we needed from the business, executive management, and the board in terms of buy-in to move it forward.
Mm-hmm.
Because once we had Spark come in and we felt reasonably sure we could pass this, we went ahead and put a business case in front of executive management and the board to get their approval to move forward with the costs and the review. And that part went pretty well, but the next part was organizing everyone for the audit, because the audit was up and down the organization. And so, we really had to coordinate the timing of it to make folks available during the audit period.
Okay. Speaking of time and manpower and costs and budget and whatnot, what can you tell us about the amount of resources that this did require to get this done?
If you hire a company like Spark, I was amazed at how much help they gave us. I was able to run the operation and not have to take as much time as I thought I would. Mm-hmm. In terms of working with the groups and coordinating the control documentation and collecting any evidence of the fact that these controls were being implemented in the business. They did a lot. I mean, they did a lot in reviewing what we had, asking for what they needed, approaching people themselves. So it wasn't as demanding in terms of time commitment and resources, in terms of also disrupting the business. It was very frictionless, I would say.
Mm-hmm. So here's one follow-up question, actually. I know that ISO standards are more widely used and accepted in Europe and other parts of the world. Did that factor into your thinking at all about using ISO, that it might be an easier sell for some international audiences rather than the stereotype of a U.S. anti-bribery standard, we have to do it this way, and that can turn some people overseas off? But did that color your thinking at all?
I mean, we didn't go to the agents specifically yet on it. I mean, yeah. They may have been aware, and the business at whole was aware, and because of the UK bribery,
yep.
And the fact that Europe tends to embrace the ISO standard, there was this belief that by having that certification, that it creates a lot of credibility for the company that has it, mm-hmm. in terms of earning the respect of its customers. So it was something the company immediately wanted to pursue. Now, in terms of the U.S. aspect of it, in terms of the regulations, I think the UK Bribery Act being a lot more comprehensive probably makes the ISO anti-bribery a lot more acceptable in Europe.
Yeah.
Now, when you get outside Europe, then you potentially could be seeing a little bit of different perspective, because then you are potentially looking at an outside organization kind of telling a company in China or located in Shanghai how to conduct business.
Mm-hmm.
But the trend, as has been to shore up bribery and corruption. OECD's efforts. You saw the Kim Rae-young Act come in South Korea, which actually had strict spending specific regs about entertainment and gifts to foreign or to government officials. And so I did not think that there was any qualms about moving this forward and understanding the value of the program or of the system.
Okay. So now let's say the standard is in place, it's up and running, and for whatever reason, the worst happens. The company is in front of the Justice Department or the UK Serious Fraud Office or some other regulator. In that case, you're going to need to show how your program meets the requirements of an effective compliance program. The Justice Department has the federal sentencing guidelines. The SFO has its 6 principles of compliance with the Bribery Act. Like, how does 37001 help a company or help you guys if something like that were there and a regulator is asking for evidence, documentation?
I think they're closely linked. I mean, I haven't tried to specifically match, the ISO requirements to, let's say, that the UK bribery 6 principles, but I would say in order to obtain a certification and to demonstrate compliance with UK bribery, you have to do the. I think there's a linkage. I mean, you have to be tailoring the compliance program to the risk. You have to have the top level commitment. You've got to be conducting ongoing risk assessments. You have to be doing due diligence. You have to be doing training and communication. And you certainly have to have a program of being able to monitor to ensure what you're doing is working to specifications and that the control is actually mitigating the risk. So the design of the program is doing what it's supposed to. So in looking at it in that light, I see it as a means of being able to litmus test your program to determine whether how well you're doing in terms of risk management in the area of bribery and corruption.
Mm-hmm. And so then, last question: your program did have an outside audit after it was implemented by Spark Consulting. You had an outside audit from Ethic Intelligence. So how did you find them, and how does that audit itself unfold?
Yeah, I mean, the unfolding of it is, you basically, it's like any other type of audit you would undergo. Is they look at preliminarily what you have in place and determine the locations they want to go to. Then that part was a challenge, and I think next time that one of the places they'd want to go to would be our Asia Pac, even though we do not have a large operation there. Mm-hmm. They came to America, and even though we have a lot of functional controls here, that was an area where they felt like they weren't getting a whole lot, because most of the operation and internal controls are run out of Jersey and in London. So that aspect of it was interesting. It was more challenging. I've been on both sides of the fence of audits. I mean, I've been an auditor, and I've also run various operations and been audited. And so I've been through some ISO audits that I didn't think were that demanding in terms of how the interviews went, what you had to prove, the evidence that you had to produce. But this one I found very challenging. Some of the questions were carefully crafted. The timing of them was there to see if there really was a commitment, and whether or not you were following a script or not, and whether or not you really understood your role in terms of the program and who to go to and what your resources were. I learned a lot through the whole program. In fact, there were a couple things that were brought up that made me think, twice. And that was what it was for. I mean, the whole idea was that, we wanted certification, but we wanted to improve. And so we've been in constant improvement. And I've tried to evolve this program over the last 6 years. So, the point has always been to, get better, to be ahead of the curve. And I felt through the audit experience that I learned quite a bit that will help us going forward.
So actually, one other last question, and this just popped into my mind. What will be your plan for this going forward? I mean, was this something where the company might get, I don't know, recertified in years to come, or re-audited, or how do you go from here?
Well, we get 3 years. I mean, the certification is good for 3 years, but there is a review, a lighter review that takes place once a year, and what they look for is anything that they found that's minor or is considered a finding. They expect to be implemented. Plus, they give you recommendations of things that you can do, you don't have to do, and so they will come back and review those to see where you are. And technically, I suppose if you didn't follow through on some of those, and they felt that the aggregation of those activities made a major non-conformance, they could pull the certification. That's not very likely, but we would then, we would go through those 3 years, and then we would look in 3 years to go through a full audit again and have the certification extended.
All right. Well, Mark, you covered plenty of ground for us today, and that's all the time we have. But thank you very much. This has been a very good conversation. We appreciate it.
I appreciate having talked to you about it.
All right. And again, everybody, that was Mark Speck. He is Chief Compliance Officer and Head of Internal Audit at CPA Global. And Mark was here today to talk to us about the new ISO 37001 anti-bribery standard, which CPA Global has just implemented this month of July. So that is all for today. I'm Matt Kelly, editor of Radical Compliance. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll join us again next time.